I will confirm or not confirm, but yeah. Think of what you will, though. I want to keep it a big question mark.
There goes one of my questions. But I love the idea. Hey there, my people! Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, you chose a really good one for your initiation because I have very special guests here today. Have you ever wondered where the idea for Ride the Cyclone came from? Or what are the hidden meanings behind the lyrics, music, choreography? I sat down with Brooke Maxwell and Jacob Richmond, the minds behind Ride the Cyclone, to go through all of that and some of the burning fan theories that keep this fandom alive. You heard that right, I discussed your craziest ideas with them, straight from the comment sections on my previous Ride the Cyclone videos, myth or fact style. And there's also some exciting news about this show, so I would recommend watching this video until the end, I'm just saying. But before we get into it, don't forget, be sure to ride the cyclone and hit the subscribe button below, but do it before you ride, just in case. Now, without further ado, Brooke, Jacob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks
How are you doing?
Really good.
Great.
I generally can't wait to deep dive into some speculation about the show with you, but before we get into specifics, Ride the Cyclone is an extremely peculiar, inventive show. So many times while listening to it, I caught myself whispering, this is weird, in the best way possible. Where the hell did the idea come from?
Well, many moons ago, I was working on a cabaret collective called the Atomic Vaudeville in the city, where we created a lot of our own original work and music. Brooke was involved with that as well, too. He kind of was writing all of these really cool songs. I think they're actually still on the internet as well. Like, so if you want to hear like early Brooke Maxwell jams, they're on the internet.
Yeah, they're on Bandcamp.
They're on Bandcamp. So the great thing about Brooke was always, you could say to him like just weird hybrids, like, oh, I wanted to be kind of punk rock, but mall pop meets kind of like, but with a little bit of a classical edge. But I also want them to tap dance and hula hoop, and he'll go, okay, cool, gotcha. And then he'll write a whole song about that. So that was really fantastic. Anyway, I was always, I always wanted to dramatize what a lot of people say is you can't dramatize it because you're basically dramatizing an accident, right? You know, or some catastrophe that happens, which is fundamentally not dramatic. I feel that majority of us actually end up losing people in no rhyme or reason ways, like a brain aneurysm, just like kind of like not very dramatic, but also not fundamentally having tons of meaning behind it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of explore that because I definitely come from a family where a lot of personal loss had happened in our family, but I also wanted to make it a comedy. So about a very dark subject. So then I approached Brooke and said, hey, Brooke, I want to write this. I want to write a musical. And he's like, yeah, okay, sure. Like Grease or something like that. And, you know, he's like, cool. So what's it about? And I go, well, it's about these people that die on this roller coaster. And he goes, wow, that sounds like dark, right? So, and then I was like, no. I want it to be like a comedy, and like I want it to be a celebration of life, not like this total bummer. We decided that we wanted every single kid to have a different genre of music or a different vibe. Everybody just likes different things. And especially when you're in adolescence, how much the type of music you listen to defines you. And then so we kind of just ripped from there.
You talked about how you wanted to write a show that was not about the tragedy. It was more about what happens after, you know, the result of that. I thought we could dive right into some fan theories because I have one that I think connects a little bit to that idea. So these are all comments that I had in my previous videos about the show, and I thought we could start with one that brings a whole new perspective to the meaning of the plot and the characters. One of my subscribers said that I've heard that in Ride the Cyclone, the characters represent the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And Jane Doe has been said to represent death itself in some cases. It may sound far-fetched at first, but then I was looking at how that they matched characters to the respective stages, and it kind of fits. And it would also fit the idea that it's about what comes after the tragedy and not the tragedy itself. Any chance that crossed your minds while writing the script?
Yes, definitely. We actually had a whole opening number where we did the 5 stages of grief.
Oh, that's cool.
And then as we did it, we felt it was a little too on the nose. We really tried not to spoon feed anything because it is such a powder keg of an idea, the idea of grief. I mean, I've been through grief myself, and it usually never is as neat as the 5 stages of grief. Like, oh, okay, now I'm on acceptance. Now I'm on denial, right? Like you kind of fly back and forth in between all those 5 things in the course of an hour. We definitely had that in mind. Whether all of the characters neatly fall into those, I don't quite think so, but I definitely think that that was in our headspace when we were working on it. And definitely Jane has always represented, if anything, the kind of enormity of that tragedy, right? Like, whereas everybody else, you kind of almost forget until she goes and you go, oh, wait a second, all of these kids are dead. Right?
So speaking of the script, Jamie Heard said that the script has gone through quite a lot of changes over the years. The one you just watched, which was the video I was doing, isn't the one that's currently used, but in every iteration, Ocean and Constance's relationship has been the heart of the show for me. Do you feel like you landed on the final version of the book, or should we still expect changes in the future?
Hopefully not. I mean, never say never, because
Jacob has a son that was born in the course of Ride the Cyclone, so maybe he could continue with some of the rewrites. Do you think? Do you think he might be up for that?
Yeah, just pass it on. But the funny thing is, the more we rewrite it, the more slowly it returns to the first draft of what we've ever written. Because that's always the danger of rewriting something, is that you can make it becomes like eating 20 donuts. You stop tasting them after a while. Like, you don't even know what's happening anymore, because you're just like changing for changing's sake. We've always known everyone's relationship with each other, so it hasn't really changed dramatically a lot. In kind of, I've just added new jokes or taken away new jokes, or Brooks added new harmonies or sections and then taken them away. I mean, literally, it's older than my child. So
is there any element that's never been changed since the first draft?
Oh yeah, lots. Brooke, Brooke, why don't you chime in here with this?
Yeah, definitely. Noel's lament has only changed in title, and maybe we cut a verse. That character, that monologue's been maybe pruned down. There was some other versions of it which were pretty amazing as well, but they were pruned down to serve the storyline and keep it tight and moving forward. And the same thing, the Jane Doe experience has been the same, exactly the same.
I think that there's been a couple like musical zhuzhes, like I think it used to have a very big crescendo at the end, and then instead it kind of went haunting and kind of more quiet.
Yeah, same notes, different dynamics.
Same notes, different dynamics, but not much of a change. Constance's monologues never really, that was the first thing I ever wrote. So we cut a couple lines, but not much has changed from it.
That is so interesting that Jane Doe never changed, because she's probably the most iconic character in the show. And you just like at once done perfection. It's really cool that Constance's monologue was the first thing you've ever written, because that is my favorite monologue in the show. I think I actually cried when I watched it the first time, because it feels so human and so not too close for comfort, just close to comfort you. You know, it's hard to explain, but it feels very relatable. And there are some ideas that are so brilliantly described in a way that it's mirroring feelings that you wouldn't be able to explain in simple terms. Only like poetry could do it.
It was funny because I wrote it, I mean, just in full disclosure, I may have had a bit too much wine that night. So I didn't even remember. And I was like, oh, I got to write about 17-year-old kids. I don't know what to write about. I don't know what to write about. And then I kind of went to bed and woke up, and I actually cried when I first read it, because it was like I hadn't even written it. I was like, who wrote this? This is great. It's like that fairy tale about the elves that come and fix the guy's shoes, right?
Yeah.
So like, thank you, elves.
And what was it that changed the most since the first draft?
We've never written a musical before. This was our first musical, so we don't know anything. So we learned as we went along that openings are really important as are endings. Yep. So those were really challenging, and there's a lot specifically on the music, but also in the plot reveal and establishing like what an opening does in the stereotypical musical was new to us to sort of figure that out.
Also, to say in our credit, I mean, we come from Canada, and quite frankly, musical theater is not as big a deal here. It's not really done as much, right? Do you agree, Brooke?
Yeah, maybe not, but I think it's more to do with our backgrounds. Like Jacob is like a very literate background, straight theater, and I'm just a music guy. Like I like the Beatles, and I like David Bowie and Tom Waits, and so that seemed to fit really well together. But yeah, so the opening and the closing, those are big responsibilities that we gradually sort of pieced together as we went along, sort of begrudgingly in some ways.
Yeah, they were a nightmare sometimes.
Yeah.
Like the opening was just an absolute beast. And you'll notice that there's probably about 40 versions of it online. There's so much bloody exposition in it. It's so important to establish the tone of the show. It's establishing every single character. It's like so much is happening in that, but you don't want it to feel like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't want it to feel like it's this kind of exposition.
There's a subtle artistry to it.
Yeah. So how to make it dramatic and interesting, but not have the audience feel overwhelmed with how much exposition is happening. But it kind of all had to happen there.
That is definitely very tricky. And since we're speaking of the opening, when we see Jane Doe beheaded at the very start, and she's singing about, you know,
I know this dream of life is never ending, it goes round and round and round again. I was trying to figure out, why is it that the very beginning is the only time we see Jane without her real or her temporary head, and how without her head you wouldn't be able to sing, right? So I'm thinking what we see at the start is the present, the moment of the accident, but what we hear is Jane's voice from the future, when she already knows she has a second chance to live, which would make the idea of a never-ending circle of life in the lyrics very fitting. Maybe I'm reaching too far here, but we all know, like you said, the beginning of the show is super important to set the tone and establish motives. What did you want people to take away from the starting music and lyrics in that very first scene?
Initially, she just hummed it in the Canadian version, and then we added the lyrics, which were very kind of Lewis Carroll, almost fairy tale-like. But I mean, in my own mind, kind of what's been happening for the last 20 years in the kind of textual kind of basis is Karnak's been on and totally bored and totally kind of existentially just kind of in hell. So he's kind of created this musical for these kids. And Jane is also her own thing, right? Like a kind of lost spirit within the context of it. I mean, of course, if you were going to be really sadistic, because I'm a huge Samuel Beckett fan, like, so that the idea that the play just starts over again. That's too cruel. That's too cruel. Like that would be like kind of like that they're just constantly on cosmic loop. But that was too dark. I personally think that any interpretation is great on that level. It's kind of her little hopeful song, even though she doesn't have a head, as this kind of lost soul in the warehouse. Because I feel like she's kind of in the warehouse with Karnak, whereas the other kids aren't, right? Okay. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I feel like she's just this little kind of spooky ghost that he's aware of in the warehouse. There was an old draft where he also he had a popcorn box as a friend, and, you know, because he's just super lonely and bored.
That is so funny. Jamie also mentions Ocean and Constance's relationship. If you ask me, you've written some of the dearest characters I've ever come across. And because I listened to the cast recording before actually watching the show, I had very different perceptions of all of them. I mean, I did not like Ocean at all in the album, but it's simply impossible not to like her in the show. Did you write the show around the characters, or did they come to you after the plot was already drafted?
The thing is, it's such a sandbox plot anyway, right? Like, I mean, it's funny because there have been kind of in the past, it doesn't really have a plot. And they go, actually, it's got 6 plot. It's actually very tricky to manage. And then it's actually got 7 stories going on at the same time. So it's actually trickier than that, or that everybody's got their own wants, their own desires, their own kind of, and also navigating with each other. So like, I've definitely known Oceans in my life. So it's a composite of those kind of people. And the whole kind of idea with Ocean's arc is that she finally becomes the decent person she always pretended she was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a big spoiler, but I'm sure that the people who are watching this probably have seen it.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then her relationship with her friend, who she's never really seen all her life, who she just assumed was kind of, who hadn't really even seen herself. And so that's kind of where her monologue comes from.
You know, when it comes to characters, the most speculation is obviously around Jane Doe. I have a few comments here of people questioning, why don't the others in the choir know who Jane Doe is? Do they not know their own members?
Also, my favorite theory, this is a comment as well, my favorite theory is that Jane Doe was in the choir but didn't get on the cyclone. Rather, she gets hit by it when it derails. So when she's singing, from the ground beneath my feet, I hear the anguish of the street. She's down on the ground and witnesses everyone being scared about the derating. Can you shine some light on Jane's death and life for the sake of our collective mental health? Who is she? What really happened to her?
Well, that's major spoilers. We wanted to tell a musical comedy about untimely loss, right? But at the same breath, you needed to be able to give that idea also its due, its dramatic weight or pathos. So it really came more from less about who she was as opposed to kind of when you pass, you're in a city and then there's the tomb of the unknown soldier. And you go, somehow that's the saddest monument out of all of them because the person didn't even have a name. It was just hundreds of thousands of bodies. And it definitely came out of like kind of our idea. I mean, not that like I get all my inspiration from Joseph Stalin, but but it did have a quote which was like, one death is a tragedy, 100,000 is a statistic, right? If we read a news story and there's 100,000 people died in an earthquake, you can't even wrap your head around that. That's just so many people, so many stories that just went right, you know what I mean? So I think that Brooke and I were approaching it from more of a absurdist or abstract lens, but I definitely know there is an allusion to it also being Penny Lamb from Legoland, which I will confirm or not confirm, but yeah. Think of what you will, though. I want to keep it a big question mark.
There goes one of my questions. I love the idea that Jane represents all of these unnamed, unknown people that may have died in some sort of tragedy or in war, and that sometimes get forgotten to time. Here's another idea that I love and hate at the same time because it's absolutely brilliant, but also terrifies me. At Monster Energy Punk said, fun fact, Jane's high notes are meant to represent her screams when she rode the Cyclone. Is that a thing?
Yes. No, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, there was, in terms of purposeful song crafting, there's the definite that's supposed to be the roller coaster ascension, and when it hits that and then the da is a falling down.
Awesome.
That's pretty basic.
I love the idea.
Yeah, and so that theme returns a bunch of different times.
Hopefully,
just to subconsciously seed it in there.
The ascending descending scale definitely does have the not only does it mirror the roller coaster, mirrors the kind of scream arc of the roller coaster, like how you scream and kind of go that kind of nice quiet at the beginning of it, and then all of a sudden it gets like people start freaking out.
Definitely one of the thematic ideas we were excited about was the shape of the roller coaster as being a whole series of up and down and curves, and then that area where it's like your wind's in your face and you're kind of totally freaked out and weirded out. The energy's intense and so bizarre. And that's usually where we think of as like Ricky, space age bachelor man kind of thing comes in the show. Like what the hell was that? Is sort of like one of the peaks of the show where you just kind of give up to the thrill of the ride, and it's still going to go in some different directions. But
that's one of my favorite things about the music in the show. Actually, it's so unconsciously visual. You are absorbing all of this music and it's, creating imagery in your head and you don't even know how. That's because, clearly it's all been very thought through. Yeah,
and felt through. I think because that's a thing too. Like Jacob was saying about that Constance monologue or whatever that he read the day after. Like the feeling that you have. You can't just write rhyme, melody. Like there's an element. I remember describing it to Kevin. He wasn't a super fan of my thoughts, but it's like you kind of get possessed by.
He's the American producer.
Kevin McCall.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to explain why we didn't have the new rewrite by the deadline, but there's an element of like, for me anyways, you would get caught up in the music or in the sentiment, and then you kind of like wake up and go like, oh, that's happened, and it's like you got to weave a spider web. That really was beautiful. Like the first part of Jane Doe specifically for me, that was one that just came like right out. I don't know how it happened exactly, but it made you feel the thing. So you're trying to always get in touch with that feeling. For me, it's so rewarding when that translates into
it definitely does.
The show on stage and people who were there got to see it, but then to do the recording, that's exactly what we wanted people to feel. And then we can send it out to the world, and people obviously felt that too. So that's like the ultimate payoff.
Yeah, I didn't even see it live, and I could feel it just through my headphones. So at Alison Dice said, something that's super interesting to look into is the different versions of the opening song. There are 4 main ones over the years. It's really interesting to see what they drop or keep coming back to as the show evolves. Why are there so many versions of the opening song, and what are the main differences between them?
The very first song, it was very Brecht Weil, kind of. It was very Brecht Weil, like the kids coming out and talking about their dead town and everything. And the issue was, it was a great song, and it was super spooky, and Jane was introduced in that song, like right out of the gate. But it felt like it tonally was it really killed any kind of sense of joy you had afterwards, because it was so dark and so like, this is going to be intense, right? You know, and then when the kids started talking, it was like, wait, what? Like, we're supposed to laugh as well. So that one was really clunky. Like, it was gorgeous, but it didn't entirely flow with the rest of the show. And then Brooke, what about the second one?
Again, like we said, this was the first musical we'd written, so openings being very challenging, and what they had to do became more clear to us as we went along the road, and we were pretty much self-guiding it up to about 2013, 14, and then when we were approached by the American producer Kevin McCullum, as well as Hot Feet Productions. And the perspective was we needed some changes to make the show more of a musical theater plot as opposed to an experience. And Kevin initially said, you know, what you have right now is a cabaret.
Oh, wow.
An opening song, monologue song, closing song. I think that's right. And it was good. We liked it. It was super tight.
You were like, oh, what you have is a cabaret piece. And we were like, cool. Yeah. Like, no, that isn't cool. That isn't cool. So yeah, that's when we added the Jane Doe plot and Ocean being kind of type A, kind of bossy self. So I did like the cabaret version. I thought it was fun and it was kind of definitely where we were coming from, was because it was all direct address. The kids all talked to the audience directly, kind of, you know, even commented on their responses and everything like that, because that's definitely where we came from. But I do like the plot version as well. And then so we met the late great Rachel Rockwell in Chicago Shakes, and she was like, okay, can you make the song a little less about uranium? Because they didn't like the word uranium, because they felt like, okay, there's so much happening, and you're throwing in uranium, and Jane is coming in. She said, like, you can only have like 5 or 2 weird moments. You can't have 18 at the top in your top of your song. So then we wrote the Fall Fair Suite, right? And that was really fun. That one musically, I know there's definitely fans who are like, okay, that's the best version. That's the best song. And then we wrote another one, which was totally crazy. You know, it had moments, but it just didn't quite work. The reason why we went back to uranium, which definitely there's some fans who wish we didn't go back to uranium suite, was because I felt personally we never mentioned uranium until Constance's monologue. And then I was like, okay, that feels weird, and it kind of robs the power of our monologue that we've never mentioned the town up until that point. Because I initially also started off the show with the idea of a community dying as well. And I felt that that was getting lost completely in the show, even though one of the unifying threads that every single kid mentions is how crappy their town is, right? Yeah. You know, like that's kind of their bonding kind of thing. So sacrificing pretty music for kind of a thematically weightier opening song is kind of what we both agreed on, right, Brooke? Right? Yeah.
And Uranium came out really naturally. I think that was one of the earlier songs that we'd written in the 2009 version, I think. Mm-hmm. And it was just the idea of a quirky small town. I got really excited about that because Uranium, Saskatchewan is a real place. And
I had to Google that. I had no idea it was an actual place. Because I was so curious.
We needed a small town song, so we were fall fair, not fair. We were working at that point. Oh, it wasn't just, oh, this would be fun about this cool song, Uranium. It sounds like the Lion King. Ha ha ha. We were now, oh shit, we're songwriters. Now we have to like do an opening song that paints the picture of a small town. And you can, if you look at it through that lens, you can see us trying. But I don't know. Maybe that's musical theater too. That's when we realized it's really hard work.
Yeah, but I know, but I know that there's definitely fans who love the Fall Fair one, and I love it on a kind of. It's a little bit easier to digest musically, but ultimately, I think what you lose, what you gain in the kind of thematic of the uranium kind of being back in is subconsciously more worth it on a storytelling level.
I really love this next comment because I'm a real sucker for music motifs, so I need to know if this has any truth to it. They said, I adore how the only one who has the carnival music in their song is Jane Doe, because we in Karnak don't know anything about her, so Karnak fills it in with the only music he knows, which is carnival music. And that, I think, goes for the fact that Jane also doesn't know anything about herself, right? So she wouldn't even know how to choose the best fitting music genre for herself. Is that the reason why only Jane gets the carnival motif?
I think that's sort of what you were saying, Jacob, earlier with Jane and Karnak having been in the warehouse of the similar world.
I'd argue, because there is carnival music definitely in the bridge between the two movements of the song, but I'd argue that also there's a kind of New Orleans swing jazz in the second half, which also is evocative of death, right? I know Brooke and I are huge fans of that music. So, and then kind of having that soaring soprano over kind of a carnival dirge. Even Brooks, the opening part, which is kind of more, I don't know, like kind of almost a classical kind of lachrymose kind of an idea of death within it. So yeah, definitely there's carnival music in it, but it's all, and they're definitely all pulling from kind of music which usually is written to eulogize a person who passes, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, one of my favorite things about that particular slice of music, the carnival music, is that it fits the personality of the show so perfectly. You know, it sounds very joyful, but there's something very ominous about it as well. So on that topic, another one of my subscribers said that before they watched the musical, they heard Noah's Lament and What the World Needs. They never would have imagined that they were from the same musical, which gets us back to that idea that you were mentioning earlier, Jacob, that each character has a specific music genre. How do you navigate finding coherence while being so diverse with the music? Is it easier to write music that is more free from a specific motif or genre?
This is probably more of a Brooke question, but I remember with Brooke and I were talking about initially when you go to like a state fair or a provincial fair, is you go in and you're always baffled with how many different genres of music you're hearing at the same time.
Right.
Like you're hearing like a Kanye song in one corner, you're hearing Chopin near the merry-go-rounds, you're hearing Dolly Parton in one speaker. Like you're always overwhelmed with how many genres of music are playing at the same time. So that was definitely something we took our inspiration from. And then, I mean, I don't know, Brooke, how did you find like the kind of, how did we arrive at each separate genre?
I think the characters were going to tell us a lot, right? Like you often would write the character monologue or a piece of it first, and then we would search for the song for that. Taylor Swift wasn't as popular then as when we were writing in 2015, but she was pretty popular. So What the World Needs, we came out of listening to a lot of that sort of really commercial mall music and realized that's probably what Ocean would listen to.
Yeah, anything written by a middle-aged guy from Sweden, she'd love it, right?
And we did pick on Taylor Swift a little bit too. We had some things that were cut that nobody talks about because there's only 4 people who knew about it. But Jacob had written a scene with Taylor Swift and Karl Marx had a slumber party at Ocean's slumber party that ended in a big pillow fight between Taylor and Karl Marx.
Yeah,
that was going to be with like big puppets and anyways.
Yeah, and Taylor Swift and Ocean would beat the crap out of Karl Marx, right? Anyway, so
it's amazing.
You know, and it was things that were like character based. What would the character like and be listening to? Ricky Potts, obviously, sort of the David Bowie Interplanetary.
That was probably the most obvious one. It's like, this is Bowie all over it.
And the bullet that we dodged with Noel was before we landed up with Fucked Up Girl, or Noel's Lament, sorry, it's called, was we were trying a bunch of different things, and there was like just riffing out there. And then Jacob, I think you just solidified the character, but I was pitching, and there's a song called like Love in the Food Court, where Noel was going to sing songs in the full, you know, it was just terrible pop. But then Jacob sort of pitched that angle, that direction, that gypsy swing, or what do we call it?
Yeah, or like French chanteuse song kind of thing, Edith Piaf kind of, because that's music that I super love.
Well, and again, same thing with like Constance's Sugar Cloud. In the earlier versions of the show, the cast would play all the instruments. There's no that was finally an area where there's no backtracks.
Oh, wow.
Jane played drums in one version, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah,
background singers. That Virgil the Rat came out and played bass. So it was like this little small town garage band. And so that was the goal for that Sugar Cloud music.
Since we're talking about the song specifically, one of the comments I made in one of the videos that stirred the most discussion was about the meaning of Noel's lament. As soon as I learned Karnak defines Noel as the most romantic boy in town, the whole song became a reference to romanticism as an artistic movement, and Noel as a romantic artist who craved, you know, strong emotions and wild experiences. Is that interpretation at all valid, or should we look at it more from the point of view of romantic relationships?
My undergrad was history, so definitely studied the Romantic era, right? And so, in the idea of the Romantic era, the valorization of self over all things, right? You know what I mean? Or the idea of, you know, the kind of those romantic figures, or romanticism feeding into nationalism and awful kind of movements. But in his own innocence, it's about, I'm definitely basing it on kind of the Byron-esque kind of, you know, burnout, fade away, kind of living in ratty apartments and drinking absinthe and all those kind of things. But also the idea of the destruction, but then also for him to have this prosaic, almost humiliating life as a Taco Bell employee, right? You know what I mean? Like that whole idea of how do you make something like that even attractive or not absolutely repulsive to the idea of romanticism is in there. Another kind of Easter egg in the show, which I've never really been able to kind of get it, but every character also represents a kind of aspect of the community, right? Okay. You know, like the literary artist, the politician.
Oh, that's cool.
Ricky is the religious figure. You know, Constance, the kind of proletariat worker. Anyway, but I didn't know how to express that in any elegant way without it being kind of really didactic or kind of like where like he's just screaming at you all the way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that would have been a very different show.
Very different show. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that Noel's Lament, the title of the song changed. Just the Random Guy pointed out that Noel's Lament is actually a ballad, and the Ballad of Jane Doe is actually a lament. Were the songs ironically titled on purpose?
Yes, it wasn't a typo.
Love it.
Yeah. The reason why Noel's lament is a ballad, this ballad is actually a lament, is because he longs for a story like that, right? Like, or a story where he's lamenting. So he's actually lamenting that he doesn't have a story that he can lament in, if that makes sense. And then Jane has a lament about the fact that she doesn't have a ballad, right? So it's...
What was the original title?
I think it was just That Smurfed Up Girl, which, you know, that's what Brooke always called it.
That smurfed up girl. That fucked up girl, effed up girl.
We didn't really title the songs until we had the album, so...
Oh, wow.
I know you were traditionally supposed to always do all the songs in the program.
Yeah.
But we were like, why would you do that? That's like such a spoiler, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Would you have like all of the monologues in Hamlet, like before you kind of go and see it? Not that I'm comparing myself to Shakespeare. I'm just like saying.
Sounded like you were, Jacob. It looks like there's a lot of hidden meanings in choreography and stage movement as well. Ed Madsen B pointed out that a lot of people say the Sugar Cloud was the only dance number where the kids had free will. I had never realized that is indeed the only number where in the end they don't look like they have just been controlled by this invisible force and had no idea what was going on. And I kind of want that to be true now. Can you confirm or deny that?
Yeah, no, it's even like Karnak says as much, that he's taken the liberty of choreographing their movements in advance, right? So if it was a musical, you wouldn't, you know, they just break out into song and dance and no one really ever talks about it afterwards, right? Which always, that's always been my kind of weirdness of musicals. Like I go, no one's going to acknowledge that that guy was in a kitchen a couple seconds ago, and then an orchestra came out, and then all of a sudden a bunch of freaky people are dancing on his kitchen sink, right? Definitely during Sugar Clouds, we wanted that to be more of a loose, because there are a lot of hugely high concept choreographed numbers, but just to have the kind of rawness or the freeness of the kids being their own selves at that point. Not putting any zhuzh on it. Just kind of having it be kind of just how kids would actually dance, or at that moment.
Now, despite the sorrow and darkness in the story, the show still feels quite heartwarming and even uplifting in the end. Where do you think is that sweet spot between exploring harsh topics but still making your audience feel hopeful? What helped you find that balance between humor and tragedy?
When I chose the subject, or when I kind of like decided to work on the subject years ago, it would be so easy to make it completely depressing, right from beginning to end, right? And me going through my own grief, I kind of wanted to write a show for people going through the same thing I was going through. I kind of wanted to kind of create a piece which explores untimely loss in a respectful fashion, but also doesn't make you feel even crappier about a thing that is already just unbearable, right? You know what I mean? Like, so just something to give you kind of like to have a good night out on mine and Brooke's dime about something that you can't really wrap your head around, but also to kind of leave with a kind of sense of joy. I've struggled with that too, because I lost people who were very young, and I go, how does that really square with the world, right? Problem is, what I was doing, I realized, was focusing on an hour in their lives, right, where something horrible happened to them, as opposed to their entire lives, where a lot of wonderful things happen. So I think that's kind of what we were really conscious of, and I hope we found that balance of it being super fun and hysterical, but we're never really making fun into characters, hopefully. Like, we're having fun with them, but we're not making fun of them. And then also to have that kind of still a sense of we see you and we know how hard that is. If you're going through that, here's something for you to have a good time with.
Yeah, I think that was the major challenge of the piece, was that balance between trying to present some sincere human experience with a light, fun night out at the theater. And I personally was just, fascinated with like Beetlejuice or something like what are some other shows that have made light of death. I'm a huge fan of Tim Burton and that whole team, of course. And they play with death and spookiness, but it doesn't make me feel connected. I'm observing it, right? So here we are in the middle of it. It's like, it's a really delicate fence to walk. Yeah. And again, the roller coaster, we couldn't have had a better metaphor, because that is the way you do experience life and loss.
It's so funny because when I was going through the cast recording, obviously I didn't have visuals, but the roller coaster is there and it's weaves through the entire show. It took me listening to the entire thing to realize that, oh, that is life, right? It's a roller coaster. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's the most obvious metaphor in there, but it took going through the experience with these characters.
Sometimes it takes a horrible accident to make you realize
exactly. I feel like Karnak is a great example of that aspect of the show, actually, because while he's responsible for most of the funniest remarks, at least in my opinion, he's also an extremely, sad machine, which is totally understandable, because who wouldn't be depressed if their main job was to predict how people die, right? And Karnak is that force that compels the characters to reach for certain truths about their own lives and in life in general. For you, what is the moral of the story? What is that truth that you'd like people to leave the theater thinking about?
Tricky question, Momo. Always pay your taxes. No, I'm kidding. No, I've got like 6.
Don't ride the cyclone.
I think it's the idea of community is definitely something I want to explore in it as well too. Like they start off not really knowing each other, not really even liking each other, but then they know that they become kind of a sense of community. That sometimes we focus on things that are completely, we think are our entire world, but are completely fucking irrelevant to anything like that really matters. But we get so myopic. I mean, I've certainly been there myself too, where all of a sudden I'll go, oh my God, right? Like something awful happens in my life, and then I go, why did I care about that thing? Like that seems so irrelevant to me now, right? You know,
so
you know, we were hoping to have like kind of it just feel kind of joyful, and also for you to remember to have a sense of perspective with existence, to kind of go know how fleeting it is, know that kind of that thing that you're stressed about, like your taxes or anything like that, is doesn't really mean as much as you think it does, you know, or that award or that trophy or some of the smaller things in our lives are the most important.
That's what I love about Constance's speech, actually, because it encapsulates the idea really well.
Yeah.
Is there anything on the horizon for the show? I would personally love to see live at some point.
The thing is, I, for some reason, we've never done it in the UK, so or hopefully that happens one day.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
It just opened in Australia, or is opening in Australia?
It's opened in Australia, yeah. I find personally the kind of trajectory, I think Brooke and I have both talked about it, like we like that it's kind of now being adopted by, it seems like a ton of community theaters, kids self-producing it and stuff like that, which I think is really cool. But for next steps, who knows? Every time I say, oh, this is going to happen, it never does. So I've just stopped.
Stop fixing it.
The whole thing with TikTok, we could have never anticipated that. So, you know. No. So when it exploded on TikTok, that was totally weird and random, but beautiful.
Although, Jacob, if we were smarter, we would say we're in development for the website, the official website, to be launched in the
we're making the official website will be released on September 14th, Ride the Cyclone Day. So
okay, things are happening. Okay,
so there'll actually be official merch, not stuff stolen from kids on Tumblr and put on Red.
You heard it here first, guys. Official merch. Oh my god, I'm gonna be all over it.
All right, I have one last question for you. Virgil, what a great name for a bass playing wire chewing rat. Who came up with that?
Well, that's definitely Jacob.
Yeah, well, it's just Virgil, like kind of, I think it's Dante, and he takes him down into the afterlife, down to hell and stuff. So it's Virgil takes him, the poet, the blind poet. So yeah, that's basically it. And then we needed, the funny thing is it's still in the show because we love it so much. Back when we were like a little rascals, we had like $3 to our name. We needed somebody to be able to lift and put down the curtain, but there's no way they could not be seen on stage.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, we got to create a person who makes sense doing that in this world. So we created Virgil, right? And also we needed a bass player as well. And then he basically just got so baked into the script that it was impossible to kind of cut him. So it's great. He's still there.
I'm very glad that you just kept him in there.
I've pushed this for a long time, but nobody listens to me. But Virgil should be the actual logo for the show. That's the shadow of a bass playing rat. I think that just says so much.
Or just have like 20 rats on the poster, just to, you know, just all in various eating a chicken leg or something like that.
Tiny bit misleading. Brooke, Jacob, what an absolute pleasure it was to have you here on the channel. I could do this all freaking day. There's definitely enough questions for a 24-hour session, but I'm afraid this is our time. Any last messages you'd like to leave the fans with?
Well, just to thank them so much, and how lovely it is that we found our people, because the road that we were on wasn't necessarily going to get us there. It's just such a delight to see all the different offerings, creative offerings and interpretations and connections that people have with the show, whether it's their theories or their cosplay or their art or their covers. It's just so affirming that there's other weirdos out there, and go and write your own show, because we did it.
Yeah, it was super easy. It only took
super easy. No. But get your weird out there, because we need it, especially now in the time of like AI and algorithms and stuff. Let's get we want the humanity, and I feel that's what people connect with so much with it, and that's just so gratifying.
There you go. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks so much.
Oh man, that was cool. I want to thank Brooke and Jacob again for taking the time to talk to me, and by extension, all of us, and share all of those interesting nuggets about the show. It was really awesome to learn a little bit more about the creative process and the characters and story. Thank you all as well for leaving such interesting comments in my previous videos and essentially doing the work for me. Really appreciate you sharing your passion. And before I go, I have two little things that the guys asked me to share with you. And trust me, you want to stick for this part, because for those of us thirsty for some more Ride the Cyclone, the official website for the show is launching on September the 14th at ridethecyclonemusical.com. As of mid-July already, there might be some cool stuff starting to pop up there. So mark your calendars and definitely go check it out. And for the musicians, creative people out there who need some inspiration or just want to vibe with the songs, the Ride the Cyclone sheet music is also available for purchase at Ride the Cyclone Musical at Bandcamp.com. If you'd like to see more interviews like this on the channel, let me know in the comments. Leave your ideas of who I should be interviewing next, what we should be talking about. You know this channel thrives on your suggestions, so hit that comment section. Did you enjoy this video? Then make sure you leave your like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time to conquer the world of musical theatre. Keep singing. Ciao!